Welcome to the Behind Story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a crazy story. Let's jump right in. The morning started like any other until I stepped outside and saw my farm drowning in bubbles. Not just a few rogue suds floating around, but thick, waist-deep, foamy mountains of artificially scented chaos. My cows were bellowing in distress. My dog was spinning in frantic circles, and my prized rooster, Cluck Norris, stood frozen atop the fence post, his slicked back feathers making him look like he had just escaped the gates of poultry hell. I barely had time to process the absolute absurdity of the scene before a shrieking child flew past me on a giant inflatable slide, landing face first into the frothy abyss. That was when I saw it. The enormous banner flapping above my barn, like some taunting proclamation from an enemy nation. Welcome to the Maplewood Ridge HOA Annual Bubble Extravaganza. A slow, burning realization settled in my chest, pushing out every last trace of my peaceful morning coffee buzz. I was about to go to war. 3 hours earlier, I had been sitting on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the sun rise over my fields. My farm had been in my family for generations, a retreat of peace and quiet, a buffer against the ever-encroaching suburban sprawl that seemed determined to swallow up every patch of green space. I kept to myself, tended to my crops, took care of my animals, and, most importantly, avoided any and all interactions with the insufferable dictatorship known as the Maplewood Ridge Homeowners Association. The Maplewood Ridge HOA was infamous for its ridiculous rules and tyrannical leadership. They once fined a resident for having a lawn gnome that was deemed insufficiently tasteful. They banned lemonade stands for potential commercial disruption. They mandated that all mailboxes be painted the same shade of beige, which they had pretentiously dubbed suburban tranquility. And the worst part? Their president, Karen Whitmore. Karen was a force of nature, if nature were a middle-aged woman built like an overinflated beach ball, with a haircut that could double as a battle helmet. She ruled with the smug confidence of someone who had never once been told no. So when a white envelope bearing the HOA's golden embossed logo appeared in my mailbox, I knew it wasn't going to be good news. I unfolded the letter, skimming through the formal nonsense about community engagement and property cooperation, until my eyes locked onto the real kicker. We are pleased to inform you that this year's bubble extravaganza will be held on your spacious farm property. This decision was made unanimously by the HOA board to ensure maximum enjoyment for our residents. Thank you for your generosity and participation. My coffee nearly shot out of my nose. I hadn't agreed to anything. I wasn't even in the HOA. Before I could properly process my fury, a convoy of trucks started rolling up my dirt driveway. The first one carried industrial foam machines, the kind they use at theme parks. The second was loaded with inflatable slides, kiddie pools, and something that looked suspiciously like a dunk tank. The third was a tanker truck full of water. And leading this circus of chaos was none other than Karen Whitmore. She marched toward me with the unwavering confidence of a woman who had already decided reality would bend to her will. In one hand she held a clipboard, in the other, a Starbucks cup large enough to drown a small animal. She beamed at me like we were old friends, and not, in fact, adversaries, in what was about to become a war of attrition. "Jack, darling," she trilled, shoving the clipboard in my face before I could even open my mouth. "So glad you're on board. The kids are going to love it." I stared at her, then at the clipboard, then at the growing swarm of HOA minions, unloading what looked like an inflatable foam cannon. "Karen," I said, my voice as flat as the surrounding farmland, "I never agreed to this." "Oh, you didn't have to," she chirped, flipping through her clipboard. "It was voted on unanimously, and since you're technically part of our extended community, we just knew you'd want to be involved." I narrowed my eyes. Extended community? I lived half a mile outside the HOA boundary. I didn't pay their fees. I didn't even get their passive-aggressive emails about acceptable flower bed arrangements. Karen, I said, taking a deep breath, I don't want to be involved. She tutted like I was a petulant child refusing to eat my vegetables. Oh, don't be such a grump, Jack. It's just one little party. At that precise moment, the first foam machine roared to life. A jet of thick, white bubbles exploded into the air. A sudden gust of wind carried the entire wave directly toward my barn. The cows let out a collective, horrified bellow. Karen clapped her hands together. Oh, look. The fun has started. Fun. Fun. I watched, helpless, as a horde of shrieking children descended upon my farm like a biblical plague. They cannonballed into the pools, launched themselves down the slides, and buried each other in foam. The water tanker began gushing, feeding the chaos. The air reeked of synthetic strawberries, like someone had set off a bubblegum-scented chemical bomb. I turned back to Karen. She stood under a tent, sipping lemonade, radiating the blissful serenity of a woman who had never faced consequences in her life. That was about to change. I stood there, my boots sinking into the foam-slicked mud, my mind struggling to process the sheer scale of this violation. My farm, my land, my home, was being overrun by screaming children, rogue bubbles, and the saccharine stench of artificial strawberries. And the worst part? Karen Whitmore was still sipping lemonade, like she had just gifted me the privilege of watching my life crumble in real time. A child flung himself down an inflatable slide, skidding across my drenched pasture before crashing into one of my cows. The poor animal let out a distressed bellow, kicking up a spray of soapy muck as it tried to escape this waking nightmare. I clenched my fists, my pulse a war drum in my ears. Karen, I said, my voice tight, controlled. You need to shut this down, now. She turned to me, blinking in fake innocence, as if I had just asked her to cancel Christmas. Oh, Jack, don't be so dramatic. It's just a little water and bubbles. The kids are having such a wonderful time. Before I could argue, another industrial-sized foam machine roared to life, vomiting out a fresh tidal wave of suds that surged toward my barn. My heart dropped. Oh, for the love of, Karen, I shouted, running toward the barn as the frothy tsunami engulfed the entrance. My animals inside were panicking. The horses neighed in terror, their hooves clattering against the wooden floor. I barely made it to the doors before I was swallowed by the expanding mess. As I yanked the doors open, a massive clump of foam smacked me in the face. It smelled like a gas station bathroom. I spat out bubbles and stumbled inside, coughing as I fought to reach my animals. My cows had backed themselves against the farthest wall, their wide eyes reflecting the fluorescent barn lights. My dog, Buddy, was frantically trying to herd them to safety, but the foam was clinging to his fur, turning him into a miserable, sudsy mop. I threw open the back gate, guiding the animals outside away from the madness. But the damage was already happening. My hay bales were drenched, my feed bags sat in a growing lake of soap and filth, and the wooden floor was absorbing every toxic drop of whatever chemicals were in those machines. By the time I turned back toward Karen, my patience had burned away like dry kindling. You're trespassing, I growled, marching toward her with slow, deliberate steps. You need to pack this up, take your circus, and get the hell off my land. Karen let out an airy laugh, waving a hand dismissively. Oh, don't be so uptight, Jack. You sound like a grumpy old man. We're fostering community spirit. You're fostering a goddamn disaster zone. I shot back. Look at my barn, my animals, my fields. Everything is. And that's when the sky opened up. A deep, rumbling thunder rolled across the farm as a wall of rain came crashing down from the heavens like divine retribution. Within seconds, the foam, the water, and the chemicals mixed into something far worse. A thick, glue-like sludge that clung to everything it touched. Children screamed as they slipped in the mess. Their shoes sucked right off their feet. Parents scrambled to pull them from the muck, but the more they moved, the deeper they sank. My cows, already traumatized beyond belief, began a full-blown stampede, crashing through the broken fencing and disappearing into the woods. The foam machines sparked and hissed, short-circuiting in the rain. One of them let out a final, pitiful gurgle before exploding in a shower of sparks. And through it all, Karen stood under her tent, sipping lemonade. I wiped a thick glob of rain-soaked foam from my eyes, my fury reaching nuclear levels. I turned to face her, rain drenching my already ruined clothes. "Karen," my voice was ice. "You're paying for every bit of this." She blinked, actually startled for the first time. Then she forced a laugh, though there was an edge of nervousness to it now. "Oh, don't be silly, Jack. HOA insurance covers all community events." I took a step closer, my boots squelching in the sludge. "That means you're responsible for the damages." The smile wavered. "Well, you brought this mess here," I continued, my voice rising. "That means the HOA is on the hook for every single dollar this disaster just cost me." Karen's expression finally cracked. Her eyes darted around as the realization settled in. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I took another step forward, watching as her confidence drained like the very foam swallowing my property. "Get your checkbook ready, Karen." She swallowed, her smugness collapsing under the weight of cold, hard financial consequences. I didn't stop there. I pulled out my phone, one of the few things that wasn't currently drowning in strawberry-scented disaster, and started snapping photos. The collapsed fences, the soaked, ruined feed, the short-circuited machines spewing weak jets of steam, the miserable, bubble-coated children crying in their parents' arms. "Oh, and just in case you think of pulling any HOA loophole bullshit," I said, raising my phone, "I'm documenting everything." Karen paled as she realized her little unauthorized party had just turned into a legal nightmare. A homeowner nearby, a middle-aged man who had been struggling to yank his kid out of the muck, glared at her. "Wait, does this mean our HOA fees are going to go up because of this?" Karen sputtered, waving her hands. "Well, I mean, it's just an event." Another homeowner spoke up, a woman clutching a foam-covered purse. "You told us this was already covered. Now we're on the hook for damages?" The murmur of panic and outrage spread through the crowd like wildfire. And just like that, Karen lost control. The fun, family-friendly event had turned into a financial nightmare, and the very people she had sought to impress were now turning on her. I stepped back, arms crossed, watching as her carefully constructed world collapsed around her. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The real battle had just begun. Karen's smug expression had crumbled, replaced with a twitching grimace as the HOA crowd turned on her. "You said this wouldn't cost us anything," someone shouted from the foam-covered horde. "My backyard backs up to this place. Do you have any idea how much of this crap is flowing into my lawn?" A man bellowed, holding up a foam-covered shoe like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom trial. Karen held up her hands, attempting a damage control smile that looked more like a nervous grimace. Now, everyone, let's not overreact. This is just a little." A tremendous crack rang out as another section of my fence gave way under the weight of the rain-soaked foam. A cheerfully shrieking child rode a collapsed section of fencing like a surfboard straight into what was left of my vegetable garden. My prized tomatoes? Gone. My carefully tended rows of bell peppers? Lost to the abyss. Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the chaotic murmurs. "Karen, you've got exactly 2 options." She turned to me, the last flicker of confidence still clinging to her like the foam dripping from her ridiculous pastel cardigan. "1," I continued, "you cut me a check for every cent of damage you and your precious HOA have caused." Karen's mouth opened, but I held up a single, foam-covered finger to silence her. Or two, I said. I sue the ever-loving hell out of you, personally, the HOA as an entity, and every board member who approved this disaster. That did it. Her mouth snapped shut. The HOA members surrounding us took a collective step back, instinctively distancing themselves from their crumbling queen. Karen let out a tight laugh, though the panic in her eyes betrayed her. Jack, dear, let's not be rash. I'm sure we can work something out. Oh, we absolutely can, I said, crossing my arms. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call every single person involved in this disaster and tell them to pack it up and get the hell off my land. Then, you're going to get me an HOA-funded restoration crew, and they're going to fix every single thing your little event destroyed. She inhaled sharply. Jack, be reasonable. The HOA doesn't have that kind of budget. I pulled out my phone and turned the screen toward her. Funny, because I just emailed every local news station about a rural farmer's land being destroyed by an out-of-control HOA. Karen's breath hitched as she scanned the screen, her eyes darting over the words illegal trespassing, mass property damage, and my personal favorite, reckless endangerment of livestock. You didn't, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ongoing chaos. Oh, I did. I grinned, watching the exact moment she realized her usual tactics of manipulation and gaslighting were completely useless. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a new email. Subject, urgent, HOA disaster at Maplewood Ridge Farm, from local news network. Mr. Parker, we would love to cover this story. Please provide any photos, videos, and an on-camera interview availability. I looked up from my phone, and for the first time all day, Karen looked afraid. I'll be expecting that check, Karen, I said, stuffing my phone back into my pocket. Now, get off my property. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the battlefield of suds and destruction remained. The HOA minions started moving some packing up equipment, some pulling crying children out of the foam trenches. The air was thick with the scent of defeat. Karen lingered for a moment longer, her lips pressed together so tightly they looked like they might fuse shut. Then, with one final glare, she spun on her heel and stormed toward her golf cart, the hem of her slacks dragging through the mud. As she peeled away, splattering foam-covered water behind her, I let out a slow breath. The battle wasn't over. Not yet. I turned to the nearest HOA member, a man in a soaked polo shirt, who looked like he regretted every life choice that had brought him to this moment. You, I said, pointing at him. Get me the HOA treasurer. He stammered. That would be George, I smirked. Perfect. George, the one HOA member who actually had a functioning moral compass, had been forced out of his position a year ago by none other than Karen herself. And I had a feeling that George had a lot of interesting things to say about the HOA's finances. 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from him in my now ruined barn, surrounded by the aftermath of suburban Armageddon. He flipped open his laptop, adjusting his glasses as he scrolled through a spreadsheet labeled HOA Financials. Confidential. You sure you want to see this? George asked, side-eyeing me. George, I said, leveling him with a look. I'm about to unleash the biggest HOA scandal this town has ever seen. Show me everything. A slow smile spread across his face. All right, Jack, buckle up. As the numbers loaded on the screen, my blood ran cold. Karen hadn't just mismanaged funds. She had stolen them. Thousands of dollars disguised under consulting fees. Money that was supposed to go toward community improvements had been funneled into spa trips, renovations on her house, and a luxury vacation to the Bahamas. A low whistle escaped me. Holy hell, George, he nodded grimly. Yep, and guess what? If you go public with this, Karen won't just be paying for your farm's damages. She'll be paying legal fees. For the first time since this disaster started, I grinned. Let's burn the whole damn thing down. George clicked a few keys, and the screen refreshed, bringing up years of financial mismanagement in crisp damning detail. The sheer scale of Karen's corruption was almost impressive. If I wasn't currently standing in a barn that smelled like wet soap and financial ruin. See here? George pointed at an expense labeled Community Engagement Initiatives for a suspiciously round $10,000. That wasn't for neighborhood improvements. That was a shopping spree. Karen billed the HOA for designer furniture for her own damn house. I whistled low, scrolling through more transactions. And this one? $4,500 for educational seminars? George smirked. That was a luxury spa retreat for her and two of her little HOA cronies. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady the volcanic rage simmering beneath my skin. This woman had spent years bullying homeowners, extorting them over petty rule violations, and bleeding them dry while funneling their money into her own cushy lifestyle. And now she had the nerve to stand on my land, destroy my property, and expect to walk away clean? No, not today. I turned to George. What happens if this gets out? His grin widened. Best case scenario, Karen's kicked out of the HOA, disgraced, and sued into oblivion. Worst case, it turns into a criminal investigation. I exhaled through my nose, the weight of sweet, impending justice settling on my shoulders. George, I hope you like revenge as much as I do. He chuckled. Jack, I've been waiting for someone to take that woman down for years. The next morning, I set my plan into motion. First, I sent an anonymous email to the entire HOA membership. Attached, a PDF containing every single fraudulent transaction Karen had ever made. Subject, where did your HOA fees go? The email went off like a bomb. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up. Angry neighbors, shocked board members, people who had once feared Karen were now furious. Then I made one last call. Melissa, I said, my lawyer cousin picking up on the first ring. I need this to go nuclear. That evening, the HOA meeting was held in the Maplewood Ridge clubhouse. Normally, these meetings were sleep-inducing, full of passive-aggressive complaints about fence heights and lawn maintenance. Not tonight. Tonight, the room was packed. Furious homeowners were clutching printed copies of the leaked financials. Karen sat at the front, clearly trying to maintain an air of authority, but I could see the way her jaw clenched, the way her fingers twitched on the table. I took my time walking to the podium, letting the murmur of outrage settle. Then I placed a single piece of paper on the table in front of Karen. My invoice, I said, my voice carrying through the tense silence. $45,000. Damages, property repairs, livestock expenses, all caused by your little bubble extravaganza. Karen scoffed, the false confidence creeping back. Oh, Jack, really? This is absurd. The HOA doesn't have that kind of... I don't care what the HOA has. I leaned in, my voice dropping. I care about what you have. Her mouth snapped shut. I straightened, turning to address the crowd. Your president here has been stealing from you for years. Thousands of dollars. All while fining you for your mailbox color or a slightly overgrown hedge. The crowd erupted. Shouts of, "Is this true?" "And you stole from us?" rang out. Karen lifted her hands. "This is ridiculous. This is a personal attack. You have no proof, oh, but I did." With a dramatic flick of my wrist, I pulled out a USB drive and plugged it into the room's projector. The screen lit up. Spreadsheets, bank statements, fraudulent transactions, gasps filled the air. Then came the kill shot. I pressed play on a recording of a phone call, one George had conveniently captured when Karen was forcing him out of his position as treasurer. Karen's voice crackled through the speakers. "Honestly, George, nobody checks these accounts. I could write myself a check for 50 grand, and those idiots would still be worried about mailbox sizes." Silence. Dead, incriminating silence. Then, all hell broke loose. People leapt from their seats, shouting over each other. Some demanded refunds. Some demanded Karen's immediate resignation. Some just screamed because watching a dictator fall is a hell of a rush. Karen's face went a deep shade of red. She opened and closed her mouth, like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she grabbed the microphone. This is all a misunderstanding. This is a smear campaign. Jack has always had a vendetta against me. A deep, gruff voice cut her off. Karen, we all turned. It was Frank, the HOA's legal consultant, standing in the back of the room. Shut up. The entire room fell into stunned silence. Frank adjusted his glasses. I just got off the phone with the HOA's attorney. You're done. The board is voting you out tonight. Karen physically recoiled like she'd been slapped. You can't do this. Frank ignored her, looking at me. Jack, I'd advise you to file your lawsuit against Karen personally. The HOA won't be covering her mistakes. The color drained from Karen's face. Frank turned back to her. And if I were you, I'd hire a damn good lawyer. The absolute fury in her expression was delicious. I crossed my arms. Karen, you brought this on yourself. She sucked in a breath. You'll regret this. I grinned. Oh, I doubt that. The meeting exploded into chaos as Karen stormed out, her empire officially reduced to rubble. I walked out into the night air, taking in the crisp satisfaction of total victory. Tomorrow, I'd get to work restoring my farm. Tonight, I was going to sleep like a king. The morning after Karen's downfall, I woke up to the unfamiliar sensation of peace. No HOA nonsense clogging up my inbox. No unauthorized circus setting up on my land. No synthetic strawberry-scented foam creeping under my barn doors. Just me, my farm, and the sweet, sweet aftermath of victory. I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, surveying the battlefield. The remnants of the HOA's disastrous bubble extravaganza were still there, collapsed fencing, patches of grass still drowning in sudsy sludge, and a lingering chemical smell that made my eyes water. But today it was my problem, and no one else's. Buddy, my loyal farm dog, lay sprawled out on the porch beside me, his fur still carrying faint traces of bubble residue. He thumped his tail lazily against the wooden boards, as if even he knew that the war was over. And then my phone rang. I glanced down at the caller ID, Karen Whitmore. I actually laughed, out loud. What could she possibly have left to say? Curiosity got the better of me. I picked up. What do you want, Karen? Silence on the other end. Then a slow, measured inhale. You think you've won, she said, her voice devoid of its usual smugness. Oh, I had won, and she damn well knew it. I don't think, Karen, I replied. I know. I could almost hear her grinding her teeth. You ruined my reputation. No, Karen, you ruined your reputation. I just made sure everyone saw the mess you left in your wake. More silence. Then, with a hiss, she spat. You're going to regret this. I grinned. Karen, I don't regret a thing. And with that, I hung up, feeling lighter than I had in years. By noon, the newly restructured HOA board had sent out an emergency announcement. They were officially launching an audit of all HOA funds, which meant Karen's financial skeletons weren't just being aired out, they were getting a full forensic analysis. Melissa, my lawyer cousin, called me shortly after. They're turning on each other, she said, practically giddy. Some of the HOA members who were closest to Karen are trying to cut deals before the hammer comes down. I took a sip of my coffee. Good, let them scramble. You know, if we push just a little harder, she might actually be facing criminal charges. That made me pause. I hadn't expected this mess to go that far. Think she'd serve time? I asked, intrigued. Melissa hummed thoughtfully. Probably not. But if we keep applying pressure, she'll be drowning in legal fees for years. I considered it. Then I shrugged. I say we let her rot. By the end of the week, my farm was finally getting the repair work it deserved, funded entirely by HOA money. The new treasurer, George, who had been reinstated with overwhelming support, made sure that I was paid in full, down to the last cent. But my favorite part of the whole ordeal? The sign, a massive wooden board, mounted right at the entrance of my property. In bold capital letters, private property, no HOA, no trespassing. And beneath it, yes, Karen, this means you. A few weeks later, I was at the local feed store, stocking up on supplies, when a familiar voice stopped me in my tracks. Jack. I turned, half expecting Karen's final act of desperation. Instead, I found myself face to face with George. "Thought you'd like to know," he said, adjusting his cap. "Karen put her house on the market. She's leaving town." I raised an eyebrow. "Leaving?" "She doesn't have a choice," George continued. "No more HOA power, no more stolen funds. And the lawsuit against her? It's going to take everything she has." For a long moment, I just stood there, processing the sheer, beautiful irony of it all. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of Maplewood Ridge, forced to flee her own kingdom. Guess she's someone else's problem now, I mused. George grinned. "I almost feel bad for whatever neighborhood she tries to worm her way into next." I smirked. Almost. We stood there for a beat, soaking in the satisfaction of a battle well won. Then, with a chuckle, George clapped me on the back. "Drinks on me tonight, Jack." I tipped my hat. "You're on." That night, I sat on my porch, sipping a well-earned beer, watching the sun set over my farm. My farm. No HOA. No Karen. Just peace. Buddy let out a content sigh beside me, his tail lazily thumping against the wood. For the first time, in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to truly relax. I had won, and damn, did it feel good. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, I thought about the future. No more sudden HOA events. No more fights over pointless, arbitrary rules. No more Karen. I raised my bottle in a silent toast to my land, my freedom, and to never, ever dealing with an HOA again. And as if on cue, Cluck Norris, my fearless rooster, my war general in the battle against foam and tyranny, let out a long, triumphant crow. I grinned. "Damn right, Cluck Norris. Damn right." I thought it was over. Karen was gone. The HOA was in shambles. My farm was finally mine again, free of entitled suburban nightmares and foam-induced destruction. I had even started sleeping in, no longer needing to wake up in cold sweats, expecting to find my barn transformed into an impromptu community center. Then, one crisp autumn morning, it happened. A white luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. I was mid-coffee sip when I spotted it through my window, and I nearly choked. No. I shot up from my chair so fast I startled Buddy, who let out a startled yelp before scrambling to follow me outside. The SUV door swung open, and there, stepping onto my land like a ghost from the depths of my worst nightmares, was Karen. For a full 5 seconds, all I could do was stare, my brain refusing to process the level of audacity standing before me. She had changed. The power-hungry, queen of the suburbia Karen had been replaced with something less polished. She looked tired. Her once pristine haircut had grown out. Her usual pastel wardrobe swapped for a somber gray. But it wasn't her appearance that caught me off guard. It was the look in her eyes. Gone was the smug, entitled glint. This Karen was desperate. She folded her arms, her lips pursed like she was swallowing glass. "Jack." I said nothing, just took a slow sip of coffee. Her fingers twitched against her sleeves. "I need to talk to you." I tilted my head. "Oh? You need to talk? Well, isn't that just funny, Karen? Because I needed to talk when my farm was being invaded by a goddamn foam Armageddon. But you didn't seem all that interested in hearing me out." Her nostrils flared, but she held back whatever venom she wanted to spit. "Jack, please." That almost got me. Almost. But then I remembered everything. The destruction, the smug laughter, the way she had tried to weasel out of paying for it. So I leaned against my porch railing, unimpressed. Go on then. Talk. She hesitated, took a deep breath. Then she said the last thing I ever expected to hear from Karen Whitmore. I need a job. Silence. Even Buddy looked stunned, his head tilting so hard it was a miracle it didn't fall off. I blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Then I laughed. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Karen's jaw clenched. It's not funny. Oh, Karen, I gasped between wheezes. It's the funniest damn thing I've heard all year, she bristled. I wouldn't be here if I had any other option. I straightened, still smirking. Let me get this straight. You, the same woman who once fined a man $300 for painting his shutters the wrong shade of beige, you need a job. She swallowed. Yes, and you came to me. She inhaled sharply through her nose. She paused, exhaling through gritted teeth. I don't have many options, Jack. The lawsuit drained me. The audit found more discrepancies than even I knew about. I lost my house, my savings, everything. I can't get another job in real estate because my reputation is. She waved her hand vaguely, like it pained her to even acknowledge it. Tarnished. I crossed my arms. And this brings you. Here? Her gaze flicked past me, to my farm, to the land she had nearly destroyed. I know I screwed up, she admitted, her voice tight. I wasn't always like that, you know. I raised an eyebrow. I found that hard to believe. Karen let out a long, shaky breath. You don't have to like me. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do need work. And I figured, since you were the one who, she hesitated, struggling with the words. Since you were the one who took me down, you'd at least be honest with me. There it was. The real reason. Karen wasn't here because she suddenly had a newfound love for farm work. She was here because she didn't know where else to go. I sighed, rubbing my jaw. This was a golden opportunity. I could tell her to shove it. I could tell her that karma had done its job, and I wasn't about to interfere. But then I looked at her again, the woman who had once ruled an entire neighborhood with an iron fist, and saw nothing but a shell. She was defeated. She was humbled. And as much as I hated to admit it, I had won. Completely. So I shrugged. You ever worked on a farm, Karen? She hesitated. No. I smirked. Good. You can start with the chickens. Her brow furrowed. I whistled, and, as if summoned by the gods themselves, Cluck Norris emerged from the barn, his beady eyes locking onto Karen like a predator spotting prey. Karen took a step back. What's wrong with that rooster? I grinned. He doesn't like people who don't respect property lines. Cluck Norris let out a low, guttural cluck. Karen paled. And just like that, the real punishment began.